Um, so we will get started. We are so excited to welcome everybody today to our April Plants, Pests, and Pathogens. Caroline was commenting just the other day how different it is from March, how much spring has just fully arrived, everything is growing, and it's just wonderful to see. And today's such a beautiful spring day. I don't know if anybody out there started off with frost, but hopefully that's the last potential chance we'll see. We have a great program today. We are going to be talking about two really popular groups of plants, Crape Myrtle and Hydrangea. And I will open with just a really quick overview of those two genuses, just to give a little context to then move into the conversation about the plant pest and disease issues of these plants, which Matt Bertone and Mike Munster will lead. Then they will go into the be on the lookout, the bolos. So those will be the insect and disease problems to be on the lookout over the next month. And Caroline will finish us up with some Extension Master Gardener program announcements. So we're glad to have everybody here today. We wanted to start off with just a huge thank you to all of our Extension Master Gardener volunteers. This is National Volunteer Week. It is always I think we're in the third week of April, each year, National Volunteer Week. And we just want to say thank you for all you do to support extension and education and outreach across the state to help people be more successful and sustainable gardeners. We've just got a few of the types of things that volunteers do across North Carolina with the Extension Master Gardener program, including offering classes and workshops and answering questions through info lines and plant clinics, helping grow healthy communities through therapeutic horticulture and youth programs, helping support healthy ecosystems by demonstrating best practices and helping people grow plants in community gardens, as well as the work you do to help with our statewide projects, such as the Plant Toolbox or being part of different citizen science and research projects that are going on. Everything you do is important and helps make a difference in your community and across the state and beyond. So thank you again. And we want to say a special thank you, since we're here in Plants, Pests, and Pathogens, to a group of very dedicated volunteers who have been helping to correct the subtitles for these recordings. So all of our Plants, Pests, and Pathogen webinars are recorded. And before we can make those available to the public, we have to make sure the subtitles are accurate. And with the amount of plant names and insect and disease names that get thrown around, you can imagine that sometimes the subtitles come out a little bit different than what's actually said. So we really appreciate Wanda Crutchfield, Deb Young, Amanda Kaiser, Michelle Lamoureux, Laurie Overton, Wendy Pittman, and Alicia Thorpe working on these recordings to correct the subtitles. If these are volunteers in your county, just let them know how much we appreciate, and you appreciate them doing this. So we can not only make our recordings available to our Master Gardener volunteers, which they are on the MG intranet, but also to the broader public by posting them on YouTube. And if this is something that you would be interested in helping with, please reach out to us at the NCEMG program at ncsu.edu. Caroline Richardson helps organize our volunteers, and she'll do a little orientation with you and let you know everything that's involved in working on these subtitles. But we always have room for more because we always have more recordings coming along. So thank you again to everybody who's been helping with these. So we're going to have a quick overview of Crape Myrtle and Hydrangea before I turn it over to Mike and Matt to jump into the pest and disease issues. So these are probably two of the most popular groups of plants in landscapes. And one thing they both have in common, which is part of what makes them so popular, is they have large, colorful flowers, for one thing, but also they're very easy to propagate. So typically when you find a plant and there's a lot of different cultivars and every nursery carries them, that's a good sign it's pretty easy to propagate because those are the plants that get into the trade and get spread around, and that the plant breeders even look to start developing because the ability to propagate them successfully is the key to making them available for all of us to plant in our landscapes. We're going to talk about Crape Myrtle first. So this is just, totally extremely popular group of shrubs and trees, small trees, especially in the South where they're hardy. Their use further north tends to be limited because of cold hardiness. And, if like me, you grew up in the South, Crape Myrtle was just always a thing. And that was just summer. It was Crape Myrtle. And it's not really until you meet people who are moving from other areas that aren't able to grow Crape Myrtle that you realize just how spectacular they are with the color and the flowers right there in just the hottest part of summer. So they are very tough, but they are best in full sun. And so some of the questions sometimes we get about crepe myrtles not blooming well can be because they're in too much shade. So even though they're extremely tough, it's best to have them in full sun and well-drained soil. And there are many varieties that have been developed, but at least 75 that you can find available in nurseries. So there's a lot of selection out there, and a lot of the variety is around flower color and the general growth habit, with some actually growing as ground covers or small shrubs, then up to kind of small to medium-sized trees. And the poster I have put here is from the U.S. National Arboretum, which had a huge breeding program. In the 70s and 80s, they released a lot of excellent varieties, which are still in the market today. They're very durable varieties just because they're such good plants. So I encourage you to look for their varieties. And in the follow-up resources we'll send out, there'll be a link to this poster so you can see it in more detail. So including all of the varieties from the National Arboretum, most of the varieties or cultivars that we find in nurseries today are hybrids, with the main parents being the common crepe myrtle, which is Lagerstroemia indica, which is the species that has the really colorful large flowers, the pinks, the purples, it brings all that color. Also has a more compact habit and will get really nice fall color. I think sometimes we overlook crepe myrtle as a plant for fall color just because its flowers are so spectacular. But the indica brings in those more intense reds and oranges to the fall color regime. And the other main parent, although there's a few other species sometimes used in breeding, but the other one is Japanese crepe myrtle, or Lagerstroemia subcustata variety Farrii. You may have it used to be just Lagerstroemia Farrii, but as we know, botanists like to change things up. So the name's changed a bit. And what this brings to the package is powdery mildew resistance. So this is a huge breakthrough in crepe myrtles when these varieties started coming out that had powdery mildew resistance. And I know Mike will touch on that some more. But it also has the dramatic dark bark. So if you're familiar with some of the varieties like Natchez that have that darker bark or real dramatic light and dark bark, that's mostly coming from this parent, the Japanese crepe myrtle. And so I urge everyone, when you're looking for crepe myrtle and planting crepe myrtle, do your research, know the varieties and know the mature size. Choose the variety that fits your space. That is going to avoid any problem or need for severe pruning in the future. So it's a huge gradient. As I mentioned, there are even some varieties out there that grow almost flat, like a ground cover. I'm not convinced that's the best use of a crepe myrtle, but I do really like these little shrubby forms like Pocomoke you see here, which only get to be about 3 to 5 feet tall and wide. And then they go up from there. So a variety like Natchez, which has white flowers and is very popular, that's going to reach at least 20 feet tall and wide. It's quite a wide variety. So you not only have to think about the height, but the width, because some of them are much more upright and some are much wider growing. So do your research. Don't just think about color, but really pick the variety that has the right shape, both width and height for your space. And that way you'll never have to murder them. I know we've all heard the term crepe murder to refer to this type of very severe pruning, which unfortunately for crepe myrtle, they tolerate it. It doesn't kill them. So people think it's the right thing to do, but it's not. This is never the right way to prune a crepe myrtle. It ruins the form. Crepe myrtle can have can really rival Japanese maple for winter form if they're left to mature in their natural shape with just some, kind of corrective pruning. So this type of pruning really destroys that. It also results in really poorly attached shoots and stems that then will easily break off in thunderstorms, and just can weaken them overall and set them up for future issues. So people will usually do this to control the size because they chose the wrong variety, or they think it promotes flowering. But in reality, it doesn't really promote flowering. And this is a great picture that comes from the Crape Myrtle pruning fact sheet from Clemson Extension, showing a variety that's been severely pruned on the left compared to one just left in its natural form, which is of course going to have a lot more growth because it wasn't pruned so severely, and that new growth is going to bear more flowers than one that's been pruned and cut back so hard. So pruning is not your answer to flowers. Your answer to flowers is sun. So most of the time when there's a non-flowering issue, it's about getting enough sunlight. So that's our quick look at crepe myrtle. We're going to take a quick look at hydrangea. There's even more species of hydrangea out there. So when you go to look for a hydrangea, you're going to find more variety, and many cultivars or varieties. We use those terms interchangeably. Literally hundreds of cultivars are out there among the several species that are commonly cultivated. The important thing to know about hydrangeas is they're all going to be better in moist soil. None of them are drought tolerant. So some of them are extremely undrought tolerant and will wilt, on the first dry day. So they do need moist soil, but not wet. You don't want to have them somewhere where there's standing water. So moist but well drained, that high organic matter, slightly acidic, those ideal conditions where everything loves to grow. And most of them are going to be best in afternoon shade. So the afternoon shade helps them also deal with the intense sunlight, which can cause them to be more drought stressed. So it is really important when you're looking at hydrangea and choosing one to know the species and the cultivar, because they vary a lot in their overall size. And again, you want to get the right plant for your space, but also in when they bloom. And so again, a lot of times with hydrangeas, some questions we get are around how to get it to bloom. And a lot of it is about pruning at the correct time. And to know the correct time to prune, you have to know which variety and species you have, and if it blooms on old growth or new growth. So we're going to take a quick look at the most popular varieties out there, and when you should prune them based on the type of growth they have, which they bloom on, the old growth or the new growth. So big leaf hydrangea or Hydrangea macrophylla, the most popular group of hydrangeas out there with over 200 varieties available. And some of the newer ones can be smaller, like 3x3. I think even the ones that say they're only going to be 3x3 will eventually be at least 4 feet, maybe even 5 feet, to well over 6 feet. Some of the big old ones, I've seen like on the Outer Banks could be 8 or 9 feet. They can really get large over time. I'll mention you'll have access to these slides in the follow-up email, and where you see the plant names linked, that will take you to the profile for these plants in the plant toolbox. So you can get all the information about them from the plant toolbox. But when we talk about big leaf hydrangea, we typically talk about them based on the flower type, whether it's a mop head, which is that full flower, which these actually happen to all be sterile flowers for the most part. So this wouldn't be a great choice for pollinators, but it has the big brown showy flower, or the lace cap. And the lace cap has fertile flowers, so flowers that actually have pollen and nectar in the middle, so a better choice for pollinators, surrounded by a ring of these sterile flowers. So it gives them this lacy, that has more of a flat flower with a lacy look. So those are both types of big leaf hydrangea. And I would say of all the hydrangeas, this is the least drought tolerant. And this is the one that pH can affect color of the flower. So in more acidic soils, they're going to be blue and purple. And in more alkaline soils, they're going to be purple to pink. So there are some varieties that will tend to be more pink no matter what, or tend to be more blue no matter what, but pH is going to have effect on the intensity of that flower color. And used to, you would always say, with these big leaf hydrangeas, do not prune them in the winter or early spring because you'll remove the flowering wood. The older varieties will produce flowers on the old growth, from the old growth. So you don't want to prune them in the late winter or early spring. But now many of the new varieties that are coming out are known as remontant. So they produce 2 crops of flowers, and they will bloom from the old growth and the new growth. So you're kind of like, when do I prune them? And first, you don't just have to prune them every year, other than to remove some dead or just just something you don't like the look of. So you don't have to do a tremendous amount of pruning. But if you needed to prune them, say you had a lot of winter kill, the good thing about the remontant varieties is they will produce new growth and have blooms on that new growth. So if winter damage, killed the blooms that would have been the earlier set of blooms from the old growth, you will still get blooms on the new growth. They'll be later. It'll be a little later in the season. So for the most part, I would recommend to people to prune these new remontant varieties if needed in late winter or early spring, knowing they're sacrificing the earlier blooms, but they're going to get a second crop of blooms. And one of the first of these types was endless summer. So you've probably heard of the endless summer hydrangea. There have been many more since that introduced. So you will want to know your variety and do a little research and understand, is it one of these reblooming types when making decisions around pruning. So the next one we're going to look at is a couple of native species of hydrangea. These aren't the only species of hydrangea we have that are native to the east and southeast, but the 2 most popular from a landscape perspective are the oak leaf hydrangea and then what's known as smooth hydrangea. The oak leaf hydrangea, Hydrangea quercifolia. So quercifolia, if you're familiar with oak trees, their genus is Quercus. So they have leaves like an oak tree. And the leaves are similar to especially some of the red oaks. So that's where the name comes from. But they have these lovely flowers, usually around Mother's Day or a little later. These long cylindrical kind of panicles of flowers. They can have pretty significant fall color. And they're very popular because they will bloom in a lot of shade. And of all the hydrangeas we're looking at, I'd say this was the most shade tolerant and still will have really nice bloom. It's also, I would definitely say, more drought tolerant than the smooth hydrangea, Hydrangea arborescens, which we see on the right side of the screen, which has more of a rounded bloom. The Hydrangea quercifolia, there are several varieties. All of them will tend to have white flowers, but as they fade, they'll get some pink and mauve tones to the blossoms. And most of them can get pretty big, even some of the ones that are sold as compact or dwarf. So just keep that in mind, that they're probably going to get 4 or 5 feet, and then some of the older varieties, 6, 7, 8 feet wide at least. Then the smooth hydrangea, they have been developed for these very large round flower heads, which are pretty spectacular, but when it does rain, they will tend to just flop over. So you might find you need to give some of them some support, and they definitely need moisture and some afternoon shade. They will wilt very quickly. So the difference between these two, other than how they look, that they're different species, is the oak leaf hydrangea blooms on old growth. So you would prune it after flowering if you needed to, but usually you don't need to do a lot of pruning on oak leaf hydrangea. Whereas the smooth hydrangea blooms on new growth. So if you needed to prune it, you would do that during winter and early spring. And then last of all is the panicle hydrangea, Hydrangea paniculata. This one is from Asia and does very well here. And probably everybody's grandmother had a peachy hydrangea, which is this older variety of Hydrangea paniculata grandiflora. And it can get really large, like 20, 25 feet, more often grown kind of in this multi trunk tree form. So that's an older one that kind of shows you the ultimate size they can reach. Most of the new varieties that are out there now are more compact, but even they're going to be 4, 5, 6 feet tall and wide. So be prepared for that. And these all bloom on new growth, so they can be pruned in late winter and early spring. And the new growth that comes out will bear the flowers. They're the most sun tolerant of the hydrangeas we've been talking about, but especially in the Piedmont and coastal plain, they're going to appreciate some afternoon shade. They also have white flowers, tend to have white or limey green flowers, but some of them, especially as the flowers age, will get these rose and pink tones. So that's a very quick overview of some of the most popular types of hydrangea and crepe myrtle out there. And I'm hoping that's going to set us up well for the discussion on plant, pest, and disease issues. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt and Mike. And I'll stop sharing my screen so you guys can jump in.
All right, thanks, Charlotte. And I'm going to start off, and we're going to swap in between. So watch out for the whiplash, everyone. But I will start, and then we'll have Mike talk. Okay, so thank you for introducing crepe myrtles, Charlotte. I am one of those people from up north who, first time I came down here, noticed this interesting plant, and yes, I kind of fell in love with it at first, and then when it started to be everywhere, I started to be like, okay, this is pretty much everywhere. So, but it is still a very beautiful plant. But due to it being an exotic and non-native plant, there are not very many pests of it here. But the problem is the pests that we do have can become severe. So crepe myrtles do provide pollen, nectar, and can be attracted to various pollinators. One study in Florida found that several native bee species use this plant, as well as honeybees, another non-native organism as well. And this is also really important because it flowers for a long time. It can flower at different times of year, so it can be an available pollen and nectar source. But this is also going to play into some considerations when using chemical controls and things like that. So let's talk about a few pests of crepe myrtle. I want to start off by talking about sooty molds. So crepe myrtles can get sooty molds on them. These are fungi that grow on sugary substances, and there are two main pests that produce large quantities of honeydew that I'm going to talk about. This is their liquid waste, and it's really just sugar water. And when that sugar water lands on leaves nearby and on the crepe myrtle itself, the sooty molds will grow on that. And so it's not a pathogen, it don't infect the plant, and you can actually see here on the picture on the left that some is kind of flaking off. So after the sugar source, the liquid sugar source is not available anymore, the fungus will die and will start to weather away. But if you have sooty mold growing, you know you have one of two pests probably on crepe myrtles. So the first one is one that we actually published a paper about recently. And so I've got the web page here, but I think some of these guys, Charlotte or Caroline, might share it in the link in the chat. But myself and a student from our department who is now a professor at University of Kentucky published a paper on the crepe myrtle aphid. So the crepe myrtle aphid is Saurocalis kahawaluokalani. Thank you all for thank you all for being here for my successful pronunciation of that species name. But it is actually likely the only, it's only really the only aphid we have here on crepe myrtles, and crepe myrtle is likely the only functional host. There are a few other hosts and some other families of plants that is supposedly on, but this is really the main host. And of course, it's an exotic species. It's native to Southeast Asia, where crepe myrtle is native to. And the name comes from actually a Hawaiian word because it was actually described first in Hawaii, but not native to there as well. So it's found throughout the world, likely wherever crepe myrtle is planted. And you can see these infestations of these aphids on the leaves. And up close, you can see what the aphids look like. They're actually very attractive looking aphids. The winged adults have these kind of knobs and kind of black patches all over the body. And the wingless forms are pale yellow to yellow with these kind of dark hairs on them. And so, but like I said, there's really not going to be any other aphids commonly on crepe myrtle. So if you find aphids on the undersides of the leaves, it's almost certainly going to be the crepe myrtle aphid. Now, crepe myrtle aphids are a common pest, but they're not going to really kill the plants. They can be abundant and causing a lot of honeydew that creates the conditions for city mold to grow. So usually chemical control is not necessary, and there are many natural enemies of these aphids. I'll tell you about in a second. Even though they're not native, many generalist aphid predators will feed on these as well. Now, there are some varieties that are more resistant, and definitely take a look. Our paper is open access, so feel free to read that. It mentions some varieties that are resistant. Unfortunately, there's some difference in the overlap, so that some of the varieties that are more resistant to crepe myrtle aphid are less resistant to powdery mildews. Um, but avoid planting where there's abundant impervious ground surface or other urban settings. So planting it out in the middle of a parking lot or near the street, whatever, can cause natural predators to be reduced. It can also create conditions where the tree is better for the aphids and they'll be more abundant. Pruning can help remove the eggs on branches, but can also encourage other pests and issues, as we'll see in a few minutes. And as Charlotte mentioned about pruning issues and kind of some misconceptions about pruning in crepe myrtle. Um, and if chemical control is necessary, first use some kind of safer things like horticultural oils and insecticidal soaps. And then there are some systemics that can be used. But as always, you'll need to make sure the timing is correct because you don't want those chemicals translocating into the pollen and nectar, which is then fed on by bees, which can then actually kill the bees and other insects that feed on the pollen and nectar. So, but in most cases, if you have a happy plant, you're not going to have a huge infestation of these aphids. We find them sporadically here and there, but just keep an eye out for them. And it's probably not going to be hard to find them, especially with the amount of sooty mold that grows around when they're kind of excreting this honeydew. And just look at some of the things that might be associated with them. This fly is actually feeding on the honeydew, so you'll often see flies and wasps flying around these plants where they're sucking on the honeydew because they want the sugary substance as well. But then there are direct predators like ants, ladybugs. These are the larvae of hoverflies, and assassin bugs can be abundant, feeding on these aphids. And these were all basically on one tree when we were out there looking at them. Okay, now a more severe pest and another one that produces a lot of honeydew is the crepe myrtle bark scale. So this is a true scale insect in the felt scale family, Areococcidae. It's Acanthococcus lagerstroemiae. And this was actually first found in Texas in 2004. Like I should actually clarify here that it's of course not native to the U.S. It is native to Asia, where the crepe myrtles are from. And then, for a long time, crepe myrtles were here without any of these pests. And then some got to Texas in 2004, and they've been spreading through the Southeast. And it was first recorded in North Carolina in 2016, and now found in many counties across the state, likely widespread and everywhere soon. So if you haven't seen it on your crepe myrtles, you probably will sometime in the future. Unfortunately, this is a very severe pest. It'll infest the bark and the cracks in the stems. The large infestations will get up on the twigs and the leaves, and they secrete this white fluffy wax around the body. And you can see the picture right here. You can identify the trees even from far away that have these infestations because it has what looks like mold or fungus growing out of it. And that's just the white wax that's created by these felt scales. The insects themselves, as you see in a second, are actually pink or red with spiky texture. And like most other scale insects, they suck the sap and produce large amounts of honeydew. So if you have sooty mold on your crepe myrtles, it could be from the aphids, it could be from the bark scales. You could technically have both on a tree, which is very unlucky, of course. Now here's some close-ups of Crape Myrtle bark scales. You can see these fluffy, felty cases that they build, but then you can see some of the ones without those fluff around them. They're kind of a little powdered, but they kind of have this pinkish red look with these spikes on them. You can see the spikes closer up, and in fact, when you put them on slides, those are like little thorny spikes on them anyway. And here you can see these higher infestations start to get on the petioles and the midrib of the leaves when they're in high infestations. And for instance, here near campus on Hillsborough Street and in Raleigh in general, we've had a big outbreak of them. And basically, they spread because the crawlers are blown around, they're splashed around on trees nearby, and other organisms carry them with them. And once a tree is infested, they're going to continue crawling up and repopulating different areas of the tree. So you can prune them out, some things out, but actually that brings me to some control. So like Charlotte said, mentioned before, we don't usually talk about control much, but this is a pretty serious pest. We do have a fact sheet for homeowners that Dr. Steve Frank in the department developed, and we'll share that with you all. But here are some notes on that, in respect to control. So inspect Crape Myrtles for signs of the infestations. If you can catch it earlier, it's going to be better than if you catch it like this, where they're completely encrusted with them. You can remove heavily infested branches to reduce the infestations, and you can even use a pressure washer or hose to remove some of the scales from the bark. Horticulture oils and insecticidal soaps can reduce their abundance, especially when the crawlers are present. And you can know when the crawlers are present by inspecting it or clipping off a twig and putting it in a bag, looking for little tiny scale crawlers crawling around the bag. Now, systemic insecticides can be applied to the soil, as I mentioned, but definitely take care not to do it when the plants are going to flower. They're going to translocate those chemicals up to the flowers that can hurt beneficial pollinators. There are a lot of natural predators. You'll see a lot of ladybugs and lacewings around them. Um, so encouraging a diverse and balanced ecosystem around your yard can support these beneficial insects and help them be more abundant to attack these scales. But I would say that they're not going to completely eliminate the scales from these trees. And you don't want to use a lot of broad spectrum pesticides like mosquito sprays around yards, because that can actually kill the beneficials that would normally kill these scales, and then can have obviously detrimental impacts. So we'll share with you a fact sheet on these Crape Myrtle bark scales. They are becoming much more abundant. And unfortunately, it's going to be very difficult to get full control on trees, and reinfestation can happen. And if people have source trees nearby with lots of the insects, you may get reinfection or reinfestation sooner than you think. And so this is an uphill battle with this pest. And I hate to say it, but I unfortunately blame the overabundance of crepe myrtles being planted with allowing these stepping stones where these insects can very readily invade new landscapes very easily. Now, a couple other pests quickly of crepe myrtle. Japanese beetle is known to feed on crepe myrtles, and I just realized that I wonder if that's because they're native to the native range of crepe myrtles. So they are native to Southeast Asia originally. They've been here for over 100 years, and that's probably why they feed on them. And interestingly, some adult flea beetles in the genus Altica, in the bottom right, will feed on the leaves of crepe myrtle, but the ones that feed on it are typically their larvae will not feed on it. They're going to be feeding on evening primrose family and some other plant families. So it's a strange kind of byproduct of nearby infestations of these insects on other plants. And I myself have never seen that since I've been here, but it does happen. And of course, numerous arthropods can be found around and on the foliage of crepe myrtles, but aren't pests. For example, one of my favorites are the bark lice or tree cattle. So these like smooth barked trees. They do not feed on the plant itself. They're going to feed on spores and algae and little detritus on the surface of the plant. So they are very adorable little insects. They are completely harmless to people, to pets, to trees, to everything else. So if you see these groups of insects on the tree, on the bark, they're kind of slow moving, usually in groups. You can see the nymphs here that are very brightly colored, and then these winged adults. Sometimes they're seen in combination. Don't kill them, don't smash them, don't spray them. They're completely benign, and they're kind of cute and fun to watch. And one final note about crepe myrtles. So you will crepe myrtles are readily attacked by ambrosia beetles too. But as I like to stress, and you probably heard me in the past, or if you're not, listen to me now. Ambrosia beetles are a sign of stress or decline, not the cause of it. So if you see beetles in in these trees, if you see these frass toothpicks and these bore holes, I don't know if you'll see these little tiny, tiny beetles. They're only a couple millimeters long on the tree, but in those cases, there's something going on with the tree. The beetles are not killing the tree. The beetles are not attacking a healthy tree. If that was the case, every crepe myrtle out there would be attacked by these beetles because they're very common in the environment. So in this case, you're probably going to see a lot of adventitious growth. So stems coming out of the ground nearby. You'll probably see a lot of other signs of stress. And also pruning, severe pruning can sometimes cause this stress, which then attracts the beetles, which can start to push it more over the edge. Now, we did get a sample in a couple months ago that did show what looked like healing of the boreholes of ambrosia beetles, but I wasn't completely sure, and I'm not even sure whether this tree leafed out this year, and I don't have a follow-up. But it is possible, I guess, that if tree comes out of the stress and the decline, the beetles won't kill it outright. But definitely keep your plants happy. That's going to be the theme for reducing ambrosia beetle infestations. Um, and I think with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Mike.
All right, thank you, Matt. So, good morning, everyone. When Charlotte mentioned frost, yeah, I was surprised this morning. I went to squeegee the dew off the car windshield and on the back window. Wait, this is slush. And then it was actually frost on the top of the car. So I was a little surprised that we got that cold. Hopefully not enough to damage any of the plants though. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to now talk about the crepe myrtle diseases and disorders, and then segue over into the hydrangea diseases and disorders before turning it back over to Matt. So we'll be doing the pest and then disease, but then disease and pest, but that's to keep the species together. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. So as far as our disease and disorders of crepe myrtle, there aren't that many, and the ones that are most likely to be encountered are the ones that I've put in bold here. So we'll talk about a couple of abiotic disorders, herbicide injury, which we've mentioned before in the program, and also something called rabbit tracks. A few diseases, powdery mildew and cercospora leaf spot being the ones you're most likely to encounter, but I'll mention a couple of others as well as show a slide of something that I do not know what the cause of it is. This is a case of suspected glyphosate injury, and you can see a little bit of witch's brooming there in the new growth. And it's a reminder to ask if you're inquiring with a client about what herbicides were applied. Don't just ask about the current season, because some of these will actually be taken in by the plant in the late summer, the fall, and then when the new growth resumes in the spring is when you start seeing the damage. So ask going back at least until the previous summer what kind of herbicides are applied when you're trying to get to the bottom of cases like this. Another group, so glyphosate is one, but also, and here are a couple of cases where the expert came down with could be glyphosate or could be one of the other categories, the ALS inhibitor herbicides. And you'll notice on the left a symptom of reduced and kind of strap-shaped leaves, and then the right, and we see this quite a bit in images that we receive, both on crepe myrtle and also on Lagerstroem. We'll sometimes see this, where there'll be a proliferation of buds coming out from the bark like that. And this is a worse problem now than it maybe was in the past because of formulations, as Joe Neal was telling us about last month, of glyphosate combined with other products that have soil activity, so that you can get root uptake of some of these ALS inhibitors like imazapyr. So be very careful with your selection of herbicides. I'll just say that again. I don't know if it's the crepe myrtles are particularly sensitive or how their root systems are, or why it is that we see problems quite a bit on those. Here's another slide of, excuse the orientation there, but I wanted to be able to have it full size, where you see some of these more developed proliferations of shoots coming out of the trunk, some of them a little bit more normal than others. Another abiotic problem or non-living situation, well, the tree is living, but the cause of it is not a living thing. It's, we believe, some kind of micronutrient deficiency, at least those people who have looked into this. And it's called rabbit tracks, an interesting name. Typically, the small areas between the veins of, it can be kind of not only discolored, but a little bit thin or window-like. There's a website that I'll try and put in. I'm not going to try and drop things into the chat now. It's been so nice that Caroline has been putting together resources for folks. So I'll put that in the things that'll go out in the follow-up email. But a website that mentions that this is primarily a problem in the nursery with the tree type hybrid cultivars like Natchez and Muskegee. And it usually occurs in the second flush of growth in the spring, but the plant usually will grow out of it. I have seen this in, there was a Veterans Memorial at one of the rest stops on the highway where I noticed a big planting of crepe myrtle around the periphery of it, and I saw this. So it can happen in the landscape. I have included, though, a little, I'm going to call it the commonometer there to indicate the commonality, and I would call this something that you would encounter rarely, but when you do, it's pretty distinctive. Here's a closer up view of the same condition of rabbit tracks on the crepe myrtle. As far as actual diseases, probably our classic one on crepe myrtle is powdery mildew, a species of Erysiphum, following others and calling it this. Haven't actually identified it to species myself. It overwinters in the buds. So right now, that photograph was taken yesterday, just outside the building here, and the newly developing shoots coming out with heavy growth of powdery mildew. The later symptoms may look a little bit different, not as completely covering the leaves, but you can get the idea of how it got started in the spring. I put this as something you will occasionally encounter because with the new hybrids coming out that have less susceptibility, I don't see this as much as you might expect based on how often it was talked about in the past. Another foliar disease is Cercospora leaf spot. And in this case, Cercospora, well, not only botanists, but also mycologists like to change names. So this is now considered a pseudo-Cercospora, Lithacearum, and a photo on the left here showing an early symptom in July. It's from a nursery sample, but then later on, and this following one was only diagnosed from the photographs, but I believe that this is what's going on here. You'll notice the lower foliage. At a distance, you say, oh, it's starting to turn fall color early. There's some yellows and some reds there, but looking up closer, you'll notice the actual leaf spots, and you can get yellowing, reddening of the leaves and also defoliation. The way to go with both the powdery mildew and this Cercospora leaf spot would be to look for less susceptible cultivars. And there's some information on those in both a Clemson fact sheet, I'll mention briefly at the end and put the link in, and also in the IPM tree book. Just to round it out, the mix of leaves here has not only the Cercospora leaf spot, but also a bacterial leaf spot. This came from a nursery. Here's an example also from a nursery. you probably wouldn't see this in the landscape unless it was recently transplanted, but you wouldn't want to try and distinguish it from the Cercospora leaf spot just on a visual inspection. All right. We do have rarely occasions where crepe myrtle will get armillaria root rot. So this is an interesting case where 2 years prior, there had been a cable laid near this planting. So that was kind of an original suspicion that maybe there was some injury to the roots there. But trees can handle quite a bit of root loss, and there was decline over a period of months on individual trees and over a period of a couple of years in the planting. And one of the first indications being premature fall color. The submitter also noted trunk sprouts, defoliation, failure to leaf out, and ambrosia beetles. Unfortunately, when we got the sample in and it was examined under the bark there at the base of the main stem were the telltale signs of armillaria. But again, this is going to be a rare occurrence as far as crepe myrtles go. And I'm not even mentioning Phytophthora because fortunately that is unknown on this plant, at least in the landscape and our experience. I have seen from time to time lumpy growth on the bark of crepe myrtle that I have not been able to explain. Maybe someone else here can, but I'm going to include this as just something that I have encountered as an unknown. And then finally, the two references I mentioned, which will have links available, one to the Clemson fact sheet on crepe myrtle diseases and pests, and also one to the IPM for select deciduous trees in Southeast US nursery production. So that means that some of the chemical recommendations in particular won't be applicable to the home situation, but there are lists of tables of cultivars with different resistances that may be helpful. Do we want, I'll let the moderators here say, do we want to pause for any questions at this point on the crepe myrtles, or shall I launch into the hydrangeas?
Personally, I think we should move on, Mike, since we have a lot to cover today. And we've got the screen switches. So I'd say move on for now. The chat is mostly being taken care of.
All right. And I can also, take a look at the chat later as well. Well, hydrangea, it's not often that I can top Charlotte with a plant picture, but this is a fantastic specimen of, it was labeled as a limelight hydrangea up at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum in Chanhassen, west of the Twin Cities, taken last August. That's my wife, Beatty, down there in the lower right corner there, and you can see how enormous this particular planting is. It's just a beautiful specimen. And we'll talk a little bit about how some of these problems and diseases are different among the different species of hydrangea. But just quickly, as an overview, we'll talk about 3 abiotic disorders: cold injury, also alluded to by Charlotte, malformed spring growth, heat and drought, and then some of the diseases. The main one that you'll be wanting to be or that you'll be encountering is going to be the Cercospora leaf spot. I was afraid I was going to get upstaged on the whole cold hardiness, but that wasn't mentioned there in the intro. So here are the hardiness zones as laid out in the Extension Gardener plant toolbox for 5 different species of hydrangea. And you'll notice that some of them are good all the way down to zone 3, whereas our macrophylla is only 6, but all the way up to 11. And I have seen what I believe is the result of some cold injury on our macrophyllas. Here is an example. It's actually a nursery sample, but it's pretty typical of what I see that I interpret as cold injury. In fact, well, you may also, of course, see the damage to the leaves on a freeze morning where the foliage has already come out. The damage like this, though, I have seen in my own yard. I've seen at the Ralston Arboretum. One of the things you want to be a little bit cautious of if you're diagnosing cold injury based on the bark flaking off, that both Hydrangea quercifolia and Hydrangea anomala have naturally exfoliating bark. So we don't want to misinterpret that as being cold injury. And as Charlotte already mentioned, this can be pruned out and your shrub will be all right. Another stranger thing that can happen in the spring is this malformation of the first flush that may be kind of misinterpreted as some kind of a virus type symptom, but it's not really proven what is the cause. I was talking again with Brian Whipker about this yesterday, the floriculturist, nutrition specialist, and he still seems to be in the camp that it's something to do with boron, and it would be a boron deficiency possibly. But he says it starts actually the previous year, the previous fall, and you just see the symptoms like this when that first flush comes out. Severely affected shoots will be blind, but the plant will survive and probably be all right. Now, let's say you've gotten over these early season hurdles with the cold injury and your first flush came out. Well, then you have the great blossoms on the big leaf hydrangeas, but then the warm weather sets in, and all this photo isn't a big leaf. We do see it a lot on that heat or drought damage. And I'm going to put this as a common situation that you're likely to encounter. So from the toolbox, again, this is, of course, limelight, paniculata, but big leaf hydrangea performs best in areas with dappled sunlight, partial shade, or deep shade, protected from afternoon sun. So that is, of course, one of the problems that we get: dry weather and the sun, and not just wilting, but you can get actually these large blotches, necrotic blotches on the leaves. Here's another example now on Macrophylla, where an old blotch of that heat drought stress there, and also accompanied by these smaller spots. Now, this is from my own yard at our previous house. The plant did not have protection during for the afternoon sun. It was on the west side of the house. And also these other smaller spots that start coming out in August. You'll probably see it on every hydrangea in the state, at least the macrophyllas. And I showed a picture. Oh, no, I'll show that in a minute, but this is a Cercospora leaf spot, and extremely common. So it's going to be high on the commonometer. It is a species different from this as a true Cercospora. It's not the same one as gets on the Crape Myrtles or on beans or on so many other things. They tend to be different, but this one has got an exclusive contract with the hydrangeas, and mainly you're going to see it on the macrophyllas, but I wouldn't rule out on arborescens. Not on paniculata in the US as far as I know. It is a fungus, and the spots typically are in the late season. Common enough that I would say, what should you do about it? Well, I showed this slide last September of in the same planting, but on a side that had more shade, so better conditions for the hydrangea and much less in terms of the leaf spots. So probably the first thing is to make sure that you have the right plant in the right place. Mulching, make sure it gets its irrigation during dry spells. Keep the dead fallen leaves raked up to reduce the amount of the fungus that will carry over from one year to the next. And since it's fairly cosmetic, then there's not really a need to spray. But if for some reason there is a real urge to do so, there are some things that can be used. You can check the Clemson the Clemson fact sheet out with some information about things like products with myclobutanil or chlorothalonil. Those would probably be the two most commonly available ones. Another leaf spot that looks a little bit different is Cornespora. And this one, it's reported as Cornespora cassicola, and that's important because this is not exclusive to hydrangea. That would be a species that's involved in diseases on many plants. And notice, and here's the side-by-side comparison, they tend to be larger, and they don't have that light-colored center the way the Cercospora leaf spot does. So they're fairly easy to tell apart. And this one is not as common. I was tempted to put this as occasional rather than rare, but yeah, it's definitely not as common as the Cercospora. So with all these difficulties we've been talking about with the cold injury and the new growth, the Cercospora and Cornespora leaf spots, the heat damage and so forth, really hitting our macrophylla is hard, it will be comforting to know that the diseases I will mention in the rest of this hydrangea section are really not going to be problems generally on the hydrangea macrophylla. We're going to be talking about root problems on the one hand and bacterial diseases on the other. Those tend to leave that particular hydrangea alone. So start out with Phytophthora root rot. It's not that common, but it is a possibility with other species, with species other than Hydrangea macrophylla. This particular case was a paniculata from a landscape, and of course requires a laboratory test to confirm, and you want to know that because you want to know what you can plant afterward. Wilting, though, like this, could be armillaria, but mercifully it is even more rare than Phytophthora to have armillaria root rot on hydrangeas. We have had a couple of instances, excuse me, once in a great while, of root knot nematode on Hydrangea paniculata. One of them was from last fall, and I already presented on this one. You can see it's down in the Wilmington area, and close examination on the roots showed that there were the knots there. And of course, compromised root systems, and you get problems with the defoliation and so forth that you have shown in the photo on the right. Another disease that would be more likely to be a problem in the nursery, but here's an example in the landscape on campus at the Gregg Museum on Hillsborough Street, which is Xanthomonas leaf spot, so a bacterial leaf spot. And that's something that you would most likely see, I think, on the Quercifolia. I have seen it once on one of the other species, but that would be the one to really keep an eye out for. But it's going to be a rare instance, as well as hopefully be a rare instance to encounter bacterial wilt. I'm not going to say 100% that this was what we had with this situation also on campus, but at a different location. But both Hydrangea quercifolia and Hydrangea paniculata in production in Florida were shown to have this disease. So it is a possibility to keep in mind. So Ralstonia solanacearum is the bacterium that we know well and causing southern bacterial wilt. I'm not sure if there's specialization there in terms of its host. All right, with that, I will kick it back to Matt to continue with the arthropod pests of our hydrangeas.
All right, great. Thanks, Mike. All right. All right. Well, this is going to be short because there are relatively few arthropod pests of hydrangeas. So this is one that really I've looked at our system. We really don't have many records of very, true, very regular kind of, expected pests that you would find on these. Now, their flowers are important and will attract many pollinators, including bees, butterflies, and true flies. In fact, I published a paper a few years ago about a very rarely observed fungus gnat that has long mouth parts that feeds on plants or flowers and maybe a pollinator. It actually carries pollen with it. And I recorded it for the first time on Viburnum, but also I was at a friend's party at their house while I was looking at these things and right during the same time. And they had a nice hydrangea in the backyard. I forget which one it was. And I looked at the flowers and found one of these fungus gnats on there as well. So they will attract all types of things. And the foliage being large and they're very bushy, there are lots of arthropods that find their way onto the plant. So don't confuse just being on a plant for being a pest of the plant. So lots of insects like to rest on plants. They like to kind of crawl around or kind of mate around there, things like that. So just be aware of that. So as far as scale insects, I looked up, this is worldwide associated with hydrangea. There are 29 scale species, many of which we don't have here, and I rarely ever see them there. One on the list, for instance, is the cottony cushion scale, which we do have here in North Carolina. It's a non-native one, but scales can be on hydrangeas, but I really don't see them very often. So just telling you that there's a possibility, but that it's just not very common. We did get a sample at one point of broad mites on hydrangea. So I'd love to show this, all you master gardeners who I'm going to come out and talk to are going to now get the answer to this, but I always like showing this plant and asking people what it is. And people are it's very difficult for people to identify the plant as hydrangea. Most people say dogwood or something else, but you can see these really wrinkly, crinkled, stunted, strappy leaves are created by the feeding from broad mites. And so here's a female with her eggs and a male, and these tiny microscopic arthropods will suck on the sap or the juices of developing leaves, and their saliva causes it to crinkle up and not develop fully. We also have in the system cases of spider mites infesting hydrangeas, but I have a feeling those are mostly from kind of production settings or certain settings. I doubt these are not a major pest. That's just things I'm trying to find that might be helpful for you. And one instance of another pest we've actually had a couple times recorded, and this was actually kind of surprising to me last year, was black twig borer. So black twig borer is another ambrosia beetle. It's a very tiny one, in fact, one of our smallest ambrosia beetles. And this is one of the ones that will attack what we might say ostensibly healthy plants. You know, we may think they're healthy. They're healthier looking than and they attack healthier plants than most ambrosia beetles. But I still have a feeling that if your hydrangeas are getting attacked by black twig borers, then there's some underlying stress. There's something going on. It may not be ideal in an ideal location, but there's something attracting these beetles to those twigs. And so they will bore into the twigs. They will introduce a fungus that they feed on. This will often cause a lesion and scarring. And just so you could get a size reference, so you're going to look for these little tiny pinholes. This is on a different plant, but basically the same size. You can see how tiny those pinholes are and these tiny little brown beetles. But here's from the sample last year. This was you see the lesion. And if you inspect those, you know, if you get wilting and you inspect those stems and find little pinholes, you can break it open, find these little black beetles. You know you have black twig borer, or at least an ambrosia beetle. And this is a plant that was on campus that Mike took a photo of. It also had a disease on it, which I'll let him chime in and mention. But there were black.
Lagerstroemia canker. Oh,
There you
not
go.
chiming in yet. Oh, sorry. Chime to
Well, yeah, go ahead and chime in. That's fine.
Lagerstroemia canker.
So Botryopspheric canker, which Mike let me know is an opportunist and not really an aggressive attacker of these plants, and the black twig borers are about the same thing. So we have a feeling this plant was, and actually it's out in full sun and in around traffic and things like that. It's probably not in the best spot, and so this is going to be kind of attracting these opportunistic organisms. So otherwise, we really don't have many pests of hydrangeas, so it's a really good one to plant if you want it not to be chewed on. Now, snails and slugs will sometimes chew on the leaves that are closer to the ground. They're occasional sporadic pests, but there's nothing significant that I can tell you about. So I guess that's good news. And with that, I think I'll go into some bolos real quickly, and we'll cover some be on the lookouts for arthropods, and then I'll hand it back over to Mike for his disease bolos, and we'll wrap up the session then. So, things to look out for in now late April, early May. So, these are already out and about, but you may be seeing more of them. And of course, every year is a little bit different. So, just giving that caveat. But May beetles in the genus Phylophica, these are scarabs that are kind of chestnut brown or dark, almost to black. They look like little nuts, kind of, and they are very nutty about your lights, especially. So, they are attracted to lights. They have white grubs that live underground, feed on plant roots, but often aren't a huge pest, but they can mass emerge, and many adults will come to your lights at night and kind of be found dead or kind of dazed on your front porch in the morning. This is the time of year to be looking out for possible bagworms on your plants. So if you have plants that have been infested in the past with bagworms, if you're removing those bags by slicing off the tie off and unwrapping it from the twigs, but you'd maybe not get them all, this may be around when you're going to have these little tiny bagworms emerging, and on the plants, these are the most susceptible stage and the most susceptible age. This is when you can maybe knock them onto a sheet of paper, see if you can find these little bagworms on your plants and control them. Lots of garden bugs and caterpillars are going to be hatching and feeding. You're going to have a lot of activity with a lot of different things starting soon. Another thing to look out for is your roses. Take a look for rose sawflies. They're going to start to munch little windows in the leaves, and then at some point when they get bigger, they may munch the big windows in leaves and big holes in leaves. But these are again sawflies, not caterpillars. We really don't have many caterpillars that feed regularly on roses, but we do have a few species of sawflies, so check them out. You're going to start to see a lot of galls forming and expanding because many galls are, especially leaf galls, are initiated when the leaf is coming out of the bud. You will then, once it's expanded, that's when you really get to see the big galls. So you may find these aphid galls on witch hazel, or if you're out and about, you may see these puffy wool sower galls on oaks right now. They're very distinct. And producing these produce lots of non-stinging wasps that feed on plants only, and these have aphids. And all different galls are out there. I've seen phylloxera galls on hickories. There's all different galls out there. Of course, for the things that like to attack us, they're going to be active now. So mosquitoes and ticks are going to be active, so protect yourself out there. For mosquitoes, wearing DEET will help. For ticks, using permethrin on clothing. You don't apply it to your body, but permethrin is very good for if you're out in the woods a lot, impregnating the clothing and shoes so that any mites or ticks that crawl on it will die. And of course, lots of other critters are going to be out there, not just the pests, the few pests that we have. We're going to have lots of really beautiful arthropods that are just out and about doing their thing, living their best lives in nature, including things like this rosy maple moth and this long-legged, this stilt-legged fly. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike.
All right, thanks, Matt. Let me go ahead and share some bolos on our diseases, plant diseases to watch for this time of year. And I'm going to start with a case of me not following my own advice, really. I talked about it last month that we should be on the lookout for Exobasidium leaf gall of camellia, and use this example here, and then let it slide at my own house. And by this past Saturday, we had quite a few galls there, some of which were already producing spores. So I'm afraid that the cycle may have been set up already for next year. But if you haven't done it already, get out there and check for Exobasidium leaf gall on camellias. And I'll mention we should be seeing, because it comes a little bit later, a different Exobasidium that gets on a different host. Of course, rose rosette is something, if the new growth doesn't revert back to, or revert to the normal green color, if it keeps its red juvenile color and has maybe a little bit too much extension on that stem, that's an early sign of rose rosette. And we've talked about the other symptoms elsewhere. The powdery mildews are going to be out. So euonymus crape myrtle, we talked about that already. I didn't mention the crape myrtle, though, later in the season, how it can get on the actual flower clusters or fruit. So do be aware of those. And here's the Exobasidium leaf gall on azalea. So kind of a different sort of gall produced there on the leaf, just on portions of the leaf. With rose are black spot and Cercospora. They've changed the name on that one. Again, it's not Cercospora anymore. It's not even Passiflora anymore. But those two you could start to see already on susceptible cultivars. And May, as I've said in the past, is kind of an orangey month in terms of plant problems. So you may be seeing these secondary organisms growing on the sap that's bleeding out of especially muscadine vines. It is not a, it's not that those are pathogens, but the concern is that if we got bleeding on a main trunk that indicates a crack from cold damage or some other kind of injury, you may actually eventually get decline from that, or secondary infection from pathogens. Blackberry rusts will be out, both the cane and leaf rust and the orange rust, which is more serious because it can be systemic. You can see the photos of those two there on the left and right, respectively. And cedar apple rust, the spermatial state on the apple leaves. So we've talked about what this looks like on the junipers, but now we'll be starting to see the infections on the leaves, those bright red, orangish yellow spots. And finally, and the orange list here, the fusiform rust galls on our pine trees may be showing their sporulation, but this is kind of a dry yellowish orange sporulations produced on that in April, and those spores will, if they're lucky, blow over and find some fresh oak leaves to infect. In the vegetable garden, herbicide injury, so be careful. And of course, the one we've talked about before that's easy to recognize is when a low dose of glyphosate hits a tomato plant, those leaflets at the base turn bright yellow. Over or under fertilization, something else that can happen there in the vegetable garden. If your transplants are infected, you may already be getting bacterial leaf spot on peppers and tomatoes, so do be careful there. And even early blight on tomato could show up. Tomato spotted wilt virus moving in from the weeds around will be something to be on the lookout for as well. And if you want more of the bolos, just go to our website and the menu bar on the left, down toward the bottom, click bolos and then the month that you are interested in.
And Mike, I've been getting some questions in the chat about cicadas. Yes, I forgot to put them on the bolos. I think it's partly because everybody's been contacting me all over all the time about cicadas, and so maybe I'm personally done with them, but no, they're out. Actually, it's funny. I've lied to everyone apparently. So because the cicadas emerge when temperatures reach a certain point in the soil, and different years are different, and it's been 17 or 13 years since our brood has been out. They have actually, the first adult cicada seen on iNaturalist was from Chapel Hill, and it was a couple weeks ago. So May is typically when we see the records, that's when the highest density is probably going to be, but I've also seen in my neighborhood, which I didn't expect to see them at all, but I've seen some shed skins already on leaves, of course, because they're on leaves of deciduous trees. That means those are the new leaves this year. That means those are new shed skins, which means I do have them in my neighborhood right now, but I haven't heard any. I haven't seen any of the adults. And Jim Baker, who actually formerly did this Pest of Pathogens a good bit, and he is going to bring me a specimen from his home in Apex. So I put in the chat 2 resources to be on the lookout for, to read about the cicadas. Bottom line is, you're going to know if you have them around you when they're abundant. They're going to be out there. Millions of them are going to be out there making a lot of noise. Only people really in the western half of the state are going to see them. In the east, they're really not going to be found. But those resources that I added have good maps and good information. And so maybe some of you will get to experience it. Maybe some of you don't want to experience it. I may have to travel out somewhere and take a look, but also they're big, popular insects. Send me your photos, take a look, but let me know if you have any questions.
Great, thank you, Matt. We are going to actually turn it back over to Charlotte for a brief recap. She's got a little bit of information on us. We've had some questions coming in about sterile flowers and non-sterile flowers, so take it away, Charlotte.
All right, thank you, Caroline. Yes, a couple of questions in the chat just prompted me to pull a slide together quickly. When we're talking about hydrangea blossoms, and especially if you are planting for pollinators, you will want to go for the varieties that have more fertile flowers. And the way to tell the difference is really to see pictures and see the plant in bloom and look closely at the blossoms, because most hydrangeas do produce a mixture of sterile and fertile flowers. The more wild types, you will definitely see a lot more fertile flowers. A lot of the cultivars that have been developed for the nursery and landscape industry have gone towards the sterile flowers, because they're larger and showier. So only the fertile flowers have resources for pollinators. But in nature, the sterile flowers do play a role, because nature doesn't have anything out there for no reason. And the sterile flowers can help attract the pollinators. But some of these cultivars will have only sterile flowers. So if you are really trying to support pollinators, those are not the varieties you're going to want. So here on the left are pictures of pretty much all we can see are sterile flowers. So those are the larger flowers. They make the whole flower head just look blobbier. It's a scientific term. It looks blobby because they're the big ones with petals. They typically just have 4 petals. I think they're actually modified sepals than true petals, but and so when you're seeing this and all you can find are these sterile flowers, you know, and you're going for pollinators, those would be you would want to avoid those varieties. You would then want to look for varieties that have more of these fertile flowers. So the fertile flowers are just typically the pollen and nectar bearing structures. The fertile parts of the flowers don't have typically a petal structure. And they look very lacy. So you can see the difference here is it's just got that, it's not that big blob. it's lacy or surrounded and dotted with these sterile flowers. So those are the things to look for. And they're often mixed, you know, just kind of they're mixed together. So definitely look for the fertile flowers when you are supporting pollinators. And then I added a slide. I won't go through this now, but I just want to say I added a slide that will be part of the slides and everything that goes out in the follow-up resources you'll have access to, that just summarizes the pruning. So which ones bloom on old growth versus new growth. It's here on one slide for you to look at. And I also just wanted to mention, and I'll drop a link in the chat, all of the links that get shared in the chat get added to the follow-up resources, with many thanks to Caroline. She pulls all that together beautifully. And those get sent in a follow-up email. They also get posted on the EMG intranet where you can find the recordings. So all that information will be available to you. And with that, I will turn it back over to Caroline. And while I do that, I will mention there was one question in the chat if there are any native crepe myrtles, and the answer to that is no. All of our crepe myrtle varieties and species come from Asia.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I think this has been just an action-packed plants, pests, and pathogens. We've covered it all today. Lots of good stuff. So in terms of EMG program announcements, the first announcement Charlotte just previewed for us, and that is, if you're new to plants, pests, and pathogens, or if you're just wondering, I wanted you to rest assured that we've got you covered with all these links every time. So after each plants, pests, and pathogens, I get the recording and the resources ready. And the way you're going to find them is a couple different ways. One is, if you have registered, if you signed up to attend the Plants, Pests, and Pathogens webinar today, you will get an email from me or from the intranet calendar after this webinar. So you'll get an email that says recording and resources, and the links will be there for you. Another way is if you are a member of our NCEMG Google group, which is an optional Google group that we use to send out EMG related announcements, you're also going to get an email from me with the resources and recordings. So many of you will get it twice, but it's a way of just covering the bases for people who are on one thing, and make sure that you get those resources. And of course, they're all on the NCEMG intranet, all of the resources and all of the past recordings. So keep that in mind, that we've got those things for you. We want them to be easy to find when you get a question. All right, moving along to tell you once again about the upcoming EMG College in September. September 24th to 26th will be our EMG College in Raleigh. And this is just going to be a great time to be together and to learn from one another. We have finalized the theme. Since last month, we now have a theme. It's growing healthy plants, pollinators, and people. And we now know a little bit more about the schedule. Tuesday, September 24th, is going to be pre-conference workshops at multiple sites across the state. And then Wednesday and Thursday, September 25th and 26th, those days will include speakers, workshops, and tours near NC State Centennial Campus here in Raleigh. Everything is based at the Hunt Library. Now, our full schedule is still being finalized, but we will post those details as soon as we can at the link below. And registration will open in early July. All right, we want to say special thank you to the EMG volunteers and extension agents from Lee, Harnett, Onslow, and Surrey counties for sharing the ways that they engaged the public with the last year's Great Southeast Pollinator Census. So they shared their information with us during a webinar earlier this month on April 11th, and we want you to know that the recording's available. So if you missed it, check it out and start planning how you can participate in the Great Southeast Pollinator Census coming up this August. And that's what this slide is all about. So mark your calendars. The census will take place August 23rd and 24th. And leading up to it, we've got several things to help you. One of them will be our July Plants, Pests, and Pathogens. Matt Bertone is actually going to share insect identification techniques. So it'll get you just ready to observe those pollinators during the census. There'll be a statewide webinar open to the public, so anyone can attend that right before the census in August, on August 15th. Details are coming soon on that. And keep in mind that this is a statewide volunteer opportunity. So this is something that you can consider to count towards your volunteer requirements, and you can learn more on the EMG intranet. The annual Western North Carolina Gardening Symposium has got its date. It's going to be Wednesday, October 9th, with the theme of garden cultivators, past, present, and future. Now, this is a one-day conference that's organized by EMG volunteers and agents from Buncombe, Henderson, Jackson, and Polk counties. And their lineup of speakers includes environmentalist Doug Tallamy, horticulturist and historian Abra Lee, J.C. Ralston Distinguished Professor Tom Rainey, and the author of Epic Tomatoes, Craig Lahoulier. Registration is going to open in August, so keep your eye on the Buncombe Master Gardener's website for more information. Now, we do have a new curricula to share with you that's specifically for when working with youth. Liz Driscoll, who is our 4-H specialist in the Department of Horticultural Science, she's developed new curricula that include a series of activities that bring to life agronomy, soils, horticulture, entomology, things like that for youth. So this training is offered 3 different days, and Master Gardener volunteers and agents are welcome to participate. As you can see, it's offered across the state. May 7th, it's going to be in Mills River, May 14th at Pitt County Extension Center, and May 21st at Forsyth County Extension Center. And this is a collaborative program between the NC4-H Electric program and the NC4-H Grow 4-H program. So if you want to learn more about that, email Liz Driscoll and she'll get you signed up. Okay, we do have a change of date to announce. Last month, we let you know that Joe Neal will speak to us in July, but we needed to change that date. So now he will be on June 13th at 1 p.m. And this will be his presentation on landscape weed identification and management. So register for that on the EMG intranet. And we hope you can join us in June instead of July for that. And lastly, we get to see what's coming up next month. So in May, on our Plants, Pests, and Pathogens, we're going to have guest speaker Scott Zona, who is the manager of the Extension Gardener Plant Toolbox. And he will be here to help us get the most out of using the Extension Gardener Plant Toolbox. So we hope you can join us then. And as we always do, we say a special thank you to Matt and Mike for their presentations today, and for Charlotte for her extra work on presenting on those 2 species. We thank everybody for joining us, and we wish you a good month.